Hi, this is Huw for Tone Twins TV, and in this video I'm going to be doing some light restoration and servicing on a 1966 Fender Deluxe Reverb. I'm pretty sure this is a 1966, it's always hard to tell exactly, but judging by the transformer codes, which are all late 1965, very late 65, it seems reasonable to assume that this amp was actually put together in early 1966. It's in fantastic condition inside and out. It's the original Tolex is pretty much unmarked. It's got its original speaker, and looking at the components on the circuit board, all the wonderful sounding blue signal caps are still there, and so are all the electrolytics in their little kind of cardboard sleeves. I'm not going to change anything in this amplifier unless I really feel it needs to be changed. It's in such original condition, it's kind of collector's grade, and it already sounds really sweet. So let's get inside and take a closer look. Under this cover should find the filter caps, filter capacitors for the power supply, and the circuit diagram specifies 5 16 microfarad capacitors. If these are the originals, they'll probably need changing, and they have been changed, but they've been changed for 22 microfarads. So this is probably, well, it may have been done to kind of stiffen the response of the amplifier a little bit, or it may also have been done to simply because they were the only filter capacitors that the last tech who worked on this amp had, and he just figured that 22 microfarad would be close enough. So I'm not exactly pleased to see these in here, but they would be perfectly good enough to recycle and put in a different kind of amplifier where 22 microfarad is appropriate. So I'm going to take these out, I'm going to replace them with 16 microfarads, but before I do that, I'm going to do something very, very important, basically to drain any residual charge out of these capacitors. So I'm securing one end of my drain resistor to the chassis, going to clip the other end to the positive connection of one of these capacitors. They're all kind of daisy chained together. And I'm going to leave that for a few minutes now, and then I'm going to use my voltmeter to check that there is no charge left in those capacitors. As you can see, I've removed the drain resistor. I've connected the negative connection of this multimeter, which is set to 20 volts DC. I've connected that to the chassis. Here's the positive, and I'm just going to click this on. Okay, I'm getting 0.132 of a volt. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, that's drained. So this amplifier is now safe to work on. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to correct these filter capacitors in the power supply. Okay, I'm just going to take these out as carefully as possible because these will be reusable. This is the positive end. Try and get this last one off. There you go. Not sure what this stuff is, but it hasn't, it's not silicone, some kind of, looks like wax, with some kind of epoxy. Okay, having got the filter capacitors out, what I now need to do is just get a solder sucker on each of these eyelets, just clean out as much of the old solder as I possibly can, and then I'm just going to put the new ones in. The original capacitors would have had those super cool kind of orange cardboard tubes wrapped around them, and whenever I see those I always try and reuse them and wrap them around the new capacitors, but Unfortunately, they're long gone, so I can't restore the original look, but I can restore the original functionality. So I'm going to be using these Sprague Atoms, which are rated 16 microfarad at 475 volts. So that should be absolutely perfect in here. So the positives are all along this side, negatives all along the other side. If you're in doubt, you can always tell where the positives are because these are the two 10k drop-in resistors. I've actually measured these and they're both pretty close to 10k still and don't look at all heat damaged. So I'm just going to keep those in the amplifier. So when I'm installing these, I basically try and straighten out the lead-out wires as much as possible. Try and clip the wires almost perfectly to length. That's resting tight against the circuit board now. I also try and make sure that I've got the writing on the case of the capacitor upright so that any tech in the future can see what's installed and verify that it's all been done properly. Right, just going to get the other 4 in now using exactly the same method. So I just poured a little bit of acetone into the lid of the container. I'm not using a wet Q-tip, I'm just making it slightly damp. And the finishing touch really is just a little label I like to put on the outside of the can. It's just a piece of masking tape, all caps replaced, August 2021. So whoever comes to work on this amp after me knows when these have been done, and we'll be able to make a better assessment of whether they're ready for changing or they should be good for a few more years. Okay, so I've clipped one of the test leads from the multimeter onto the black wire, mains wire. I'm just going to trace it through. There's the ground switch is still in here, but it's not actually doing anything, and this is on continuity setting, so I'll get a bleep if there's continuity. Okay, so there's a jumper wire from here across to this side of the ground switch, and then that goes onto the power switch, which then goes to the transformer. If I clip this onto the white wire, which is the, in American terms, which is the neutral. Hopefully I guess. Yeah, there you go. Right then, so this is the neutral wire. This is coming across again to the ground switch, which is just being used to basically, the tags are being used just to kind of jumper wires together. This is coming to this end connection on the fuse, and then this connection here is then going to the transformer. So it works, you know, it's fine, but modern safety conventions state that the neutral should go straight to the transformer, and the live should go to this connection on the fuse, and then out of the side connection on the fuse holder should go across to the power switch, and then from the power switch to the transformer. So I'm just going to rearrange this wiring very, very slightly. I think what I'm going to do is disconnect these wires and actually hook them on direct rather than use this kind of jumper system, but I'll leave most of these wires intact just because it's the original wiring. Right, in order to make these alterations, what I'm going to need to do is extend these main wires that are actually already inside the amp. So I'm just going to disconnect all of these. Okay, this black live wire is not going to reach the fuse without being extended. So, and the same can be said for the neutral. So what I'm going to do is just take this retaining clip out, which is just in the chassis here. I'm going to feed a little bit more of the wires through, and hopefully that extra couple of inches will enable me to get the connections where I want them to go directly. The mains wiring has been corrected, and here's the all-important ground wire, which is going to a solder tag as connected to the chassis. All this white cloth covered wire that was jumping between switches and terminals has just been tucked up out the way, and the neutral and live wires are coming straight across. The white neutral is connected to this cable here, which is going straight to the transformer. The black wire is going to the end of the fuse here, and then jumping across to the power switch and then onto the transformer. So that's all been corrected, and the next thing to do is look at some of the electrolytic capacitors on the circuit board. So as you can see from this overview of the board here, nothing has ever been changed in this amplifier. It looks 100% original to me. And these capacitors here, which have this orangey ochre coloured cardboard tube covering the components inside, these are all original electrolytics. Often you can see electrolyte material kind of oozing out the ends of this type of capacitor of this vintage, and it's an indication that they really do need to be replaced. However, visually at least, these electrolytic capacitors are in absolutely perfect condition. So rather than simply swap them out, I'm going to disconnect the ends of all of them, leave the ground connection intact, because usually it just kind of pushes straight through and then solders onto the chassis. So I'm just going to lift the positive ends, and I'm going to get a capacitor tester to test these capacitors at full operating voltage to ensure that they're still close to the stated value and also have not gone leaky. Each and every one of these capacitors is marked 25 microfarads, but as you can see from these large ones, there's two lead-out wires coming from each on the positive side. So there's basically two 25 microfarad capacitors in a single unit. This one here is smaller, and that's because it's just a single 25 microfarad. To test the electrolytic capacitors, I'm going to use my Heathkit capacitor tester, because I can test for leakage, and I've got two probes coming from it. So the first is going to go onto the negative, and this one, as you can see, has got two lead-out wires. So there's two capacitors in one housing here, both of which are supposed to be 25 microfarads. So to test this, I'm just going to pop the positive alligator clip on one leg here, and now we'll go over to the capacitor tester and I'll show how it works. Right, this is my Heathkit C-3U resistor and capacitor tester. It's not the most accurate capacitor tester or indeed resistor tester, but its main purpose for me is testing capacitors for leakage at full operating voltage. So at the moment I have these two test wires plugged into the capacitor terminals, positive and negative. I'm testing the electrolytic, so you have to get that the right way around. So the black wire is connected to the negative connection of the first electrolytic capacitor, and I'm just connecting the positive alligator clip to the one of the positive lugs of that first electrolytic. So to test for leakage, I'm basically switching this to the stated operating voltage of the capacitor, which is 25 volts. And if you look at this magic eye valve indicator here, you can see that there are open sections at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock positions. So all I've got to do is switch this over to leakage, and they will close up, and if the capacitor's okay, they will very quickly open back up again to the original position. Okay. When I switch it back to normal, the capacitor is discharged, which is a useful feature to help you avoid getting a nasty electric shock. I'm just going to switch that wire, that crocodile clip, across now to the other positive lug of the capacitor and repeat the test. Okay, same thing again. That capacitor reads absolutely fine. It reads fine for leakage, but it's slightly above the stated 25 microfarad. It's probably closer to 33 microfarads, but I think that's within tolerance. And test this next one. Same thing again. And again. So I'm just going to work my way through these electrolytics, but so far so good. Okay, having now tested all of these electrolytics, they're absolutely fine in terms of leakage. These three are a little bit high on the readings, around about between 30 and 35 microfarad, but I think on balance I'm going to leave these in. This one I have some more concerns about. It's drifted up to almost double its stated value, and because it's so far out, I think I'm just going to swap this for a new 25 microfarad, 25 volts electrolytic. As for the others, I'm just going to reconnect all of these back to the circuit in their original positions, swap this one out, and then I'm going to test all of these blue signal capacitors. Right, this capacitor here needs to come out, and I won't be able to just pull it through because the lead out wire from this capacitor is probably this wire going all the way through the board and connected onto the chassis. And that's an interesting something I've just discovered. It's not actually connected to the chassis at all. This connection has actually come loose, so I hadn't noticed it before because it was just very, very close to this blob of solder on this brass strip here, and hadn't noticed it had become loose. So I'll go back and check all the others now. So what I will do is I'm going to snip this about that, pull this through, and hopefully I'll be able to extract this capacitor fairly easily now. Pull it all the way through the eyelet. There it comes. There you go. Right, if I clean this out now, hopefully I'll be able to use the lead out wire of the new capacitor to actually reconnect it back onto the chassis. There you go. There's the old capacitor, and there's the tube. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. Just going to put a little kink on the end of the negative wire now, see if I can feed this through. I hope I'll be able to. I think I need pliers with a serrated grips. That'll do it. Okay. Tuck it under those wires there. Put it through a little bit more. Just trying to press down with my index finger simultaneously as I actually make the solder joint. Okay, it's looking good. that's a little bit marginal there. Yeah, these lead out wires aren't quite long enough. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to solder another bit of lead out wire to the chassis. Soldering iron is on maximum. My iron, which is 450 degrees centigrade, is hoping okay, I've got a nice strong mechanical connection now, and I'm also going to reinforce that with some solder. Okay, right, so that capacitor is been replaced. Hopefully re-establish this ground connection properly, and it's time to test all these blue signal capacitors. So I'm going to do exactly what I did before. I'm just going to lift up one leg of these all these blue signal caps. The thing with these blue capacitors that Fender were using in the mid-60s, and in stark contrast to the yellow Astrons, these tend not to go leaky, and they sound amazing, as well as we all know from these classic amplifiers. And if they tend not to go leaky, as long as they test good, I will be leaving these in. And there you go. So in all, I've got to test eight of these capacitors. So the good news is that none of these capacitors are leaky, and all of them are measuring really close to the stated specs. So I'm just going to reconnect all of these and leave them all in situ. I think that's just remarkable, considering the fact that this amp is 56 years old. So just going to get these reconnected now, and we'll think about firing this amp up, I think, and checking the bias. The other thing I want to do is, because the amp hasn't been used for a very long time, is these some of these pots are feeling a little bit stiff. They're turning fine, but while I've got the amp apart, I'm just going to get some deoxit into the pots and just clean them up a little bit. Before I plug the amp in, what I want to do is measure the resistance between the plates of the 6v6s and the center tap of the transformer, so I can use that resistance reading and the voltage drop across it in order to calculate, via Ohm's law, the current draw of both of these tubes individually, so I can assess how well balanced they are, and also make sure that the bias is set correctly for these tubes. And because this is a kind of mid-60s era Fender amplifier, there's this handy little bias pot on here which gives you fine control over the bias, so you don't have to kind of spend a lot of time swapping resistors back and forth. You can dial it in quite quickly. I was shooting for about 9.8, 10 watts, which is roughly 70% of the 14 watts that these 6v6s are capable of delivering. And 70% is regarded as about optimum for this type of amplifier. So I ended up with a 5.5 volt drop across the transformer windings, ended up with 415 volts on the plates of the valves, and crunching the numbers, I'm getting about 10.1 watts off of the inner 6v6 and 9.8 on the outer, and I think that's pretty well matched and pretty close together. So I'm happy with this. The amp's working, it's sounding really nice. I'm just going to do one more tweak on the inside, and I'm going to put this thing back together. So the last thing I'm going to do here is just get in there with a little bit of 400 grit paper, and I'm going to just clean up the ground connection just in these little switching jacks that are on the inputs. just to remove any oxide, because that can be a source of noise on occasion. Just basically stick this in between the connection and the tip section of the jack, and just trying to dislodge any oxide that might just happen to be on there. Okay, that should be good. I'm going to get this amplifier back in its original cabinet. But as you can see, the amplifier didn't really need that much work. I changed the filter caps, but they'd already been changed for capacitors of an incorrect value, so I was just restoring it to vintage specs. And having tested all the capacitors inside the amplifier, I only felt the need to replace one electrolytic. Importantly, all those blue signal caps, which I tested at full operating voltage, were absolutely perfect, and I wanted to leave them in the amp, and I'm glad to say I was able to do so. If you're interested in this amplifier, it's going to be available for sale very soon at Vintage and Rare Guitars in Bath, so don't forget to check out the website and maybe give them a call. You've already heard a bit of this amp at the top of the show, and I have to say that it's probably the nicest sounding deluxe reverb I've ever played through. The clean tones are great, the reverb is huge and three-dimensional, and the tremolo has just got a really nice feel. It's not too choppy, which some of these kind of optical trems can be. But best of all, when you crank it, it overdrives with this really creamy and smooth kind of characteristic that I really like, and I think it's all the better for having the 60 microfarad capacitors in there. So we'll take another listen to the amplifier very shortly with a 1963 Stratocaster and a 1962 Gibson ES330. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you again soon. Dabo.